Okay then, Chris. Well, look, I think we're past midday now. I think my computer's telling me it's 12:01 p.m. So we'll rip into it, and other people can join as they come through. So good afternoon, everybody. It now is officially the afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. It's good to see so many people online today. Thanks to everybody who's attending, to taking the time out of their days to join us as we explore how to choose the right payroll vendor for your business. And my name's Joel Smith. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Affinity Payroll, which means that I'm responsible for our go-to-market and business growth strategies. I've got a reasonably long history of working in technology leadership roles, and I've got extensive experience working in payroll, HRIS, and financial services technology businesses across Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Today, I'm joined by Evoke-HR's Director, Chris Casanelia, who I'll hand over to introduce himself.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for inviting me along. I love talking tech and especially payroll. So as a bit of an introduction to my organisation and Evoke-HR, we're a team of HR tech geeks. We love payroll and HR and all things systems. And we're not salespeople. We've been on the other side of the fence for most of our careers, either running large payrolls or implementing large payrolls. We've all executed, all consultants that we've got have all executed payrolls as well. And yeah, we just have a real good passion for this space. And we're a fairly young organisation, been around probably 2 to 3 years, but we've got extensive networks and contacts, and we've got some real relevant, cool stories to share with you around the payroll vendor selection. And we're 100% independent, so we very much kind of offer a kind of area where other people kind of don't operate in. So yeah, that's a bit about us.
Great, thanks, Chris, and really glad to have you on board for today's webinar. I appreciate you coming and joining us. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items from me to start off with. We're planning on running for about 25 minutes or so today, with a few minutes at the end for a Q&A session. So if you've got any questions throughout the webinar, you won't be able to verbalize them, but you can post them in the chat. Just type them in there and our administrator will collect those, and we'll endeavour to answer as many of those as possible at the end of the webinar. Okay, so time to get stuck into how to choose the right payroll vendor for your business. And look, personally, what I've experienced is that those organisations that are in the market for a new payroll solution, they typically already identified a problem with what they're currently doing, or perhaps they've seen an opportunity to improve the way they're currently operating. But changing payroll isn't something that businesses do very often. Well, hopefully it's not. So the evaluation process isn't always well defined. Now, Chris, I know this is something that you're passionate about as per your intro, so I'm keen to get your insights. What's your view on the best way for businesses to define their payroll requirements and ensure they end up with the best outcome?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a bit of a passion area for mine. And we've got a number of engagements or have around customer stories for us. It's about identifying those drivers you mentioned before about what's important for them. Sometimes they know, but sometimes it isn't consistently known across the organisation. So one person might say, oh, it's service. Another person might say it's compliance. Getting alignment, I think, is really, really critical before you even go to the requirement stage, because then you can flesh those out or highlight them with any requirements gathering kind of process or step. So it's a huge investment changing a payroll system, and most people balk at it. So the levers have got to be really, really strong before people will go into that space. But once you've got commitment, you've got to do the right steps. So requirements for us is critical and fundamental to get that. And a lot of people really diminish or minimize what those payroll requirements are. But 80% is compliance, and there's the fundamentals, but there's nuances every single kind of engagement we have. Would you agree, Joel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, you just mentioned, that those levers have got to be really strong in order for an organisation to take that step to replace payroll. And then you led into compliance. Is that probably what you see as being the biggest lever or reason that people will
risk and compliance? Yes, yeah, 1 and 2 really. Yeah, that is fundamentally what a payroll kind of good payroll kind of offering and vendor should be doing, right? Is first and foremost giving a compliant payroll.
Yeah. So getting alignment across the organisation, understanding what those big ticket items are for demanding the change is important. On that same theme, then I'm sure you will have seen times when you've seen the decision-making process go wrong. What are the sorts of things businesses need to avoid to make sure they're really prepared to rectify and remediate any current payroll issues that they're facing?
It's an old, we've seen this time and time again, they expect another payroll vendor to suddenly solve all the problems they've currently got. Reflect back on what those drivers are, levers are, right? Sometimes you might have to remediate what you currently got before you lift and shift or move to another payroll vendor. You can't expect them to solve all your particular issues. A good vendor will highlight and work in partnership with you, but more or less, a lot of them will just go, no, you're not compliant there, so you need to fix those particular issues. If I go back to requirements again, Joel, one of the key ones we've just had recently with a very large software organization, Trans-Tasman, in fact, it's global. What they did is they documented their requirements and they were very smug. But when we reviewed them as independent, what they've done is taken their current state and just basically articulate every single requirement they need currently. Where that is a problem is you're getting like for like, and you're not actually getting those incremental improvements or things that you'd expect a system, because those requirements may be built over time and there's lots of different historical legacy kind of decisions, or the systems influenced how that payroll rules should be built up, and so you get a kind of, you're just going to get the same when you move to another vendor. So for us, it's very much a kind of a reflection point of, those drivers, requirements, are they fit for purpose now, and what the expectation of a good system will provide you. It's a long-winded response, Joel, but sorry. Yeah.
No. I think you're spot on. I mean, we see the same. We see organisations that sort of take or attempted to take what we call a lift and shift approach to payroll, where the focus is on, well, let's fix the payroll technology because that must be where the issue is. But then if you just lift and shift another solution in, then you're going to end up with the same problems but on a different platform, most likely. So yeah, I'd agree to those points. And look, payroll impacts everybody in an organization, assuming that everybody gets paid. So who in your experience are the key stakeholders within the business that need to be consulted when researching new payroll vendors and what role they should play in the change management process?
Yeah, due diligence is critical. So someone from a procurement or someone has a holistic strategic lens of the market, knowing who the players are. You've got some architects, IT around how a particular vendor and what are the key principles you'd want of a particular vendor in terms of how they deliver their service, where they deliver their service, what are their security kind of prereqs or requirements. Obviously, having someone from a head of, so it could be the head of the HR or payroll area being involved, SMEs, as much as you can within reason to kind of do that assessment. But due diligence is critical. So everyone that has contacts at networks is really influential. Obviously, someone that is currently running or managing the payroll, having them as a SME would be ideal. So that's a kind of for us is a mix of kind of people would look to influence go to market.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we're always very encouraged where we see a lot of people sitting around the table in the room, representing different parts of the business. And typically it's not just payroll, but as you say, HR as well. Usually finance, increasingly IT need a representative there because technology choices usually require that IT involvement as well. And yeah, of course, the existing payroll function too. So once you've got the right people on board for the project, if you're looking at a payroll transformation, seems the next logical step would be defining the technical needs, the technical requirements. What's your view on the critical features and functionality that a reliable, up-to-date payroll vendor should offer or be able to offer in order to ensure that compliance is achieved?
Yeah, it's relative, right? I mentioned about that IT engagement. So some ways I would say it's not that our kind of input that would influence this. It's more your internal IT and their roadmap and what's really critical for them in terms of their key principles. But obviously, cloud is quite a key feature for most payrolls, be able to operate in cloud, having obviously the backups and be able to process pays correctly. But I think the fundamental when it comes back to is the compliance. So having some vendor that's actively, proactively looking at legislative changes, looking at your config, looking at your policies and practices, influencing or helping to helping this is kind of trying to front foot those particular issues. That's the key thing I look for a payroll vendor. I love when you see them on panels or you see them influencing legislation, not influencing, but having a story or voice at those tables for us is something that's I would advocate for every day of the week, because like I said, they could prepare that, and then they've got a kind of a BD, or not a BD, kind of a development team ready at the wings that specialize in localization to help bring that to life and make sure that you're not panicking really when it comes to any implementations or changes. So it's some of the key fundamentals for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think in New Zealand and Australia, we've probably got two of the more complicated payroll environments due to legislative reasons in the world. And so compliance has to come first. Features and functionality, obviously always good to have depth there, but the outcome needs to be a compliant payroll environment. That always has to be the focus.
Yeah,
I think as well, it's not just harder to get payroll right than it's ever been, but I think the consequences to getting it wrong are probably more punitive than they've ever been, and that challenge is just becoming more acute year on year. So compliance, absolutely, it's got to be the first tick in the box. So we also see that sometimes businesses look when they're experiencing payroll problems or challenges, and they make the decision to make a move, they might be only looking at part of the problem and not the whole picture. And typically we see that manifest as a complete focus on the technology piece. It's not wrong to have a focus on the technology piece at all, but a complete focus without consideration for the role that people and processes have to play in achieving that compliant outcome. And we see that the risk of that approach is that you end up with, what I called before, the lift and shift, rather than a payroll transformation. And then the organization still not ending up with a compliant payroll outcome. So how do you and the team at Evoke-HR typically best determine, the sort of vendor and service offering that your clients need to avoid this?
Yeah, so this is kind of more the change management is why I'm interpreting this. I mean, it's fundamental for any technology innovation or change, but you're right, a lot of it, especially in a payroll lens, gets forgotten or left to the side. It's critical in adoption. It's a sort of function that payroll, we joked about it the other day, Joel, where you only hear about things going wrong, where payroll is operating perfectly, no, there's no pats on the back for, hey, you got an accurate pay. So that change management is really fundamental to ensure that your clients, your customers, which is your employees, are getting paid accurately on time. And there's processes that kind of underpin that. Some are more complex depending on the size, any grandfathered agreements, any legislative kind of pockets that you've got in your organization. There is a lot that needs to be wrapped around that change. It's always underplayed. So we would advocate for doing an assessment, so change impact assessment with your current state versus your future state, but getting an idea of what that gap and delta is really critical to that kind of pathway or that change. But definitely don't leave it to last minute, and don't just assume it's going to be all she'll be right. There is going to be some impacts. It may not be significant, the quantum of it might not be massive, but same token, there's always changes when you're implementing new systems, interpretations, and the like. So
yeah, exactly right. I mean, when I think at Affinity, we've long recognised that it's that combination of, it's the 3 Ps: the platform, the process, and the people that create the compliant payroll environment.
Yeah.
And typically when we implement with a new customer, we're encouraging them to take a look at that the moment when they first onboard a new employee, the employee life cycle. Effectively, you onboard, you bring a new employee through into your business. Or how are you capturing their data in an accurate, compliant way? And then how are you capturing their workflow as they work with you? How are you scheduling them, rostering them, capturing their time, capturing their efforts? Are you interpreting that correctly in terms of how that lines up with the employment agreement that they would have signed? And then through to the end of the employment life cycle, how do you offboard individuals. And there are so many touch points. If you look at it in that way, there are so many touch points that influence whether or not your payroll environment is going to be 100% compliant. That's why we provide a combination of supported payroll and fully managed payroll services, along with the technology to support businesses, because all businesses have different payroll needs. So it's important that there's flex there in the offering that we take to market for sure. And another important consideration I wanted to discuss with you is integrations, software integrations.
Yeah. Very top of the way.
Yeah. and look, as a payroll vendor, what we see clearly, it's so important for us to be able to integrate with other parts of the business. There are data lakes, there's Power BI interfaces, there are HRIS solutions that need to be interfaced with, and many others. So how do businesses ensure their integration needs are met? And what are the benefits of doing that and considering that whole ecosystem up front?
Yeah, we just had one recently. They put another HRS over a payroll, and we had to manage the integrations. But the key step we did, again, coming back to the IT architecture engagement, understanding where the channels were, what the types of integrations were supported, where this data flowed, how sensitive the data is, and where the destination is, and also getting a kind of map of your current ecosystem of where all your spaghetti junction people-related information is currently going to, which is the hardest. And we've got an engagement right now where they've asked us to do a 12-month engagement with someone. They're a large New Zealand bank, and they have no idea where all this information is going to. So having a record or having a kind of baseline is critical, and knowing how you want to be integrated. Every project we've worked on, integration is the most tricky, challenging, and difficult to implement. The payroll piece, the irony, is actually quite smooth sailing compared to the integration. People make it harder than what it is, to be honest, as well. But there's a lot of technology stacks that you can use to integrate and plug in where possible, but have your fundamentals aligned and make sure you have a good resource that's going to manage that for yourself.
And integration isn't just about, yes, it injects tremendous efficiency into workflows and processes, but it also mitigates risk massively. It always surprises me the number of times we find businesses that are operating with disconnected systems and manual processes for transposing data from one into another, and the potential for human error to creep in there is significant. So it's definitely an area worthy of spending some time when doing a payroll implementation, is to understand, well, how do we automate? How do we drive integrations wherever possible?
And the other thing, Joe, you touched on is that golden source. I don't know if we're going to weave that in later, but knowing where that master data set is, and for me, payroll is fundamental around that gross net, the calculations, the leave. Those are the pieces, and sometimes it gets kind of pulled from pillar to post, especially around that leave and time. For me, getting all the stakeholders around, getting alignment of where that information should be mastered is really critical before you even start.
Absolutely. That single source of truth, getting consistent data across all systems, absolutely critical to ensuring the same business, or that the business is on the same page, but also in terms of ensuring compliance. So 100% agree with you on that one, Chris. Look, we've talked a lot about making sure that current needs are met. That's obviously usually the focus. When a payroll implementation is being done, it's normally around, well, let's fix the current problems, let's meet our current needs. But how do you also assess the scalability and flexibility of a payroll vendor's solutions to accommodate future business growth?
Yeah, sure. For us, it's a principal thing. It should always, depending on where you are, your strategy and where your growth trajectory. Sometimes it could be divesting versus, investing or growing an organization. You've got to be upfront and know that, and when you're discussing with a vendor, obviously understand the commercial implications as well, not just the platform and the technology, but having a payroll which is scalable for all your jurisdictions as well. And maybe you're multi-regional, have different payrolls in different legislative areas, so understand how that might be scaled or could be supported or might not be. But yeah, having an understanding of how easy it is to plug in or add new team members or implement organically, just scale as you might need. And that kind of touches on me for a little bit, and on the roadmap of an organisation with the payroll vendors, how much they're investing in helping or facilitating that scaling as well, to in order to support growth. A roadmap is a key differentiator because it becomes quite hard at the moment, especially if you're not used to payroll assessments, and because you can get wowed a little bit by the sales. It's actually diving into some key differentiator levers, and for me, a future roadmap and looking at how that might be supported in your organisation and what are they doing differently is things that we kind of drill into, because more or less 90% of the people will calculate a pay fairly within accurately. It's those other kind of grey areas that we like to look at from a vendor and customer fit.
And I think having worked for a number of technology businesses over the years, it's always good to look at the roadmap and understand the road ahead, the vision for the future. But it's also good to ask about innovations that have been delivered in the past, in the recent past, because that gives you a sense of what's actually been delivered. A roadmap is always never obvious deliverables. That gives you an indication as to, well, are you working with an innovative, agile organization here? What's the track record?
Critical, like you said, actually who's done it and when they've done it, because a lot of people have a lot of things on their roadmap and sometimes it becomes overwhelming, and the larger the organization, the less flexible dynamic they get to deliver those roadmap items. So again, what's been done, when, and is it just fundamentals, or is it actually a functionality change that's going to benefit your employees or customers? That's the key things you look at. Some of them are just platform changes, or they might spruik them as being changed, but really if you look at it in terms of your needs, it's not a fundamental or huge things. But real-time pay processing for employees is a kind of a trend coming out of, I think you've got a different word for it, Joel, but out of the US, around people accessing their pay a little bit earlier than maybe what they need around the processing period. Those are the sort of innovations that I reckon around pay are going to come to the fore more and more. It's going to be really challenging for an organisation to adopt it, and maybe look at how that might influence or change their policies, practices, and around pay. So that's one of the key things I can see coming down pipe for payroll.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think payroll over the last several decades hasn't really changed much in terms of the bones of it, and it's definitely ripe for disruption. We certainly feel that way, and that's why we're promoting real-time event-driven payroll with the benefits and innovations that can bring to the market. As you said, like interactive pay slips, pay on demand, and a whole bunch of other really fascinating things as well. So we're very passionate about providing those innovative services. So anybody who's interested should give us a shout. Chris, now I know I've got half an eye on the clock here as well, and I know that we could sit and talk for hours, but I said it was going to be 25 minutes, and we've just done about 25 minutes. So what I might do now is just jump into the Q&A and ask Mel, our administrator, if she's got some questions. Okay, so she's just, let me open my chat window, hold on. Okay, so there's a question that's come through from somebody. Attraction and retention of staff are two key issues at the moment for many businesses, including vendors, including payroll vendors, presumably. How do you ensure, that sounded super posh, how do you ensure that you're partnering with an organization that you can have a long-term relationship with?
I'm going to take this response from a different tact, actually, Joel. I think for me, when I'm looking at a vendor and assessment, actually, attraction and retention is a big issue in our industry, right? But for me, if I'm choosing a vendor, I want to make sure that attraction and retention applies to them, because so many of our engagements, what we've seen is a great sales speak, a great delivery, a great, yes, we can do this, and these are the calcs. But when you look at the consultants or the team wrapped around, you see a lot of attrition, a lot of movement, which can really, really hamper or influence implementation. For me, attraction retention should be principles or ethics that are really, really strong, compelling for your vendor organization. So if that comes through strong, then I'm happy as well. Or we are happy when we're doing assessments. I think that's my take on that, because like I said, so many where we've seen after 3 months there's another change, and that impact on the delivery it can't be quantified really. It's really difficult to do that. So that's my challenge on that one.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Ask the question around particularly change management. Who's going to be implementing this with us? What's the combined experience there, and how long have they been with the organisation? Because I know it's something we're particularly proud of Affinity. We've got a lot of long-serving, really experienced people on the operational side of our business. There's a lot of value in that, so it's definitely something to check that you're getting when you're moving to a new payroll vendor. Mel, were there any other questions? Okay. Payroll hasn't typically been seen as a tool to influence this, but there are certain things a payroll vendor can provide. But are there certain things a payroll vendor can provide that will enhance the employee experience? Well, I think so. Chris, what do you think?
I mean, yes, for sure. It's that back to my whole point around sometimes the best payroll is the payroll you don't actually is really seamless and easy for people. So it's how they get their pay information at a touch of fingertips without any hassles. They can look at the deltas, look at the reporting. They can know where their gross payments are changing a little bit. For me, it's around, in some ways, it's the experiences around how they can get the best results for them at a quickest time possible. Really, they want accuracy and they want convenience. So any experience around that, I think it's a good thing from a payroll vendor and a product perspective.
Yeah. Look, I think traditionally it's been understood that getting payroll wrong will certainly negatively impact the employee experience. But I think traditionally, the view has been, well, getting payroll right has to happen. But if you get payroll right, you don't really get too many kudos points for that. It's just an expectation as far as employees are concerned. But I do think that increasingly technology is enabling functionality that does positively impact the employee experience. And there's a lot of focus on employee experience at the moment, particularly with HR professionals. So I look at things like interactive pay slips that explain why people have been paid what they've been paid, as opposed to just getting the traditional dry pay slip. That's definitely a nice to have and impacts employee experience positively. And then, as you mentioned, pay on demand services enabling earlier access to earned wages, which is something we do. Can make a huge difference to people's lives and really radically transforms the pay experience. So I think there are increasingly there's the ability for payroll to become part of that employee value proposition that it really hasn't been part of in the past. Mel, is there anything else coming through? Oh, this is one for you, Chris. How does Evoke-HR work with customers to find suitable technology and services?
Yeah, so we're doing a couple at the moment. We're going to market, so we know the players out there, the usual. So usually with an assessment, we look at the size, scale, complexity of a business, the drivers, whether it's cost compliance or whatever, and we help them kind of disseminate strategy, and then we help them go to market. So choose or select, or it could be optimization of the payroll processes, or kind of supporting their payroll pieces. So all of those, I suppose, wrapped up in a button is what we do in terms of our offering. We're tech agnostic, truly independent, and over 100 years combined experience between the consultants around payroll. It's truly an area we love and we've got a lot of passion for. So happy to work with organizations and help them select their particular payroll solutions. and we can be found on Evoke-HR, Evoke-HR.com. Yeah.
Excellent. Mel, any more questions? If there are, pop them through. If not, no. Okay. All right. Well, that's great. No additional questions. Okay. Thank you. Well, and thanks for taking the time with us today, Chris, because if it would have been a short webinar if it had just been me, because I would have said, well, how to choose the right payroll vendor? Just go to affinitypayroll.com and fill out the contact us form. But I think you gave us some more insights, so well done.
Yeah.
Just to those on the call still, we'd love a little bit of feedback around the webinar. So there's a survey, I believe, that will pop up if you hang around for a little bit longer. And that really concludes our webinar for today. You'll get access to a recording if you'd like to reflect on some of the other or some of the earlier comments. So thanks again for your time. We'll see you again next time. We run these webinars monthly, so feel free to join us again next month. Thanks all.
Thank you.